He stood there alone, drenched to the bone, weeping over a casket no one else came to honor, and the man watching from across the cemetery had no idea he was about to rewrite both their futures. The rain fell in sheets that November afternoon, turning the military cemetery into a sprawl of mud and memory. John Wayne, not the actor, but a decorated Marine who'd carried that name like a burden and a badge his entire life, had come to pay respects to Colonel Henderson, his former commanding officer. But as he walked between the rows of white headstones, umbrella fighting against the wind, he noticed something that stopped him cold. Across the way, beneath a temporary canopy that flapped violently in the storm, a lone figure stood beside a flag-draped coffin. No family, no fellow soldiers, no honor guard. Just one man in an ill-fitting suit, shoulders shaking with sobs, while a single chaplain rushed through words no one but God and the rain seemed to hear. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. John's chest tightened. He'd been to hundreds of military funerals. He'd folded flags for widows and held the hands of fatherless children. But this was different. This was abandonment of the worst kind. A soldier sent off without the honor he bled for. John changed direction, his polished shoes sinking into the soft earth as he made his way toward the lonely ceremony. The chaplain glanced up, surprise flickering across his weathered face as John approached and stood at attention, his umbrella forgotten, rain streaming down his face. The lone mourner, man in his early 30s with premature gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much looked over. His face was a map of grief, confusion, and something John recognized immediately: shame. When the chaplain finished, the man approached the coffin, placed both hands on the smooth wood, and whispered something John couldn't hear. Then he straightened, saluted with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and turned to leave. "Wait," John called out, his voice cutting through the sound of rain hammering the canopy. The man stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. When he finally did, his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "You don't have to be here," he said quietly. "Who was he?" John asked, nodding toward the coffin. The man's jaw worked for a moment before words came out. "Sergeant Marcus Webb, my unit, commander in Afghanistan, saved my life 3 times over 2 tours." He paused, swallowing hard. Came home and couldn't save himself. The weight of those words hung between them like smoke. John knew that story. He'd lived adjacent to it dozens of times. Warriors who survived hell overseas only to lose the battle. When they returned to a country that had moved on without them. "Where's his family?" John asked. "Gone. Parents died years ago. Wife left him after his 3rd deployment. No kids. No siblings." The man's voice cracked. "I'm it. His whole squad scattered after discharge. I'm the only one who even knew he was." He couldn't finish the sentence. John stepped closer. "What's your first name, son?" "Robert. Rob." "Well, Rob, I'm John Wayne." "Yes, that's my real name. And I'm here to tell you that what you did today matters more than you know." Rob took his hand, confused. "I didn't do anything. I couldn't even get anyone else to come." "You showed up." John's grip was firm, anchoring. "When everyone else forgot, you remembered. When everyone else moved on, you stayed. That means everything." The rain continued its relentless assault as they stood there, 2 men in a cemetery, connected by the invisible threads that tie all who served. Then John did something that would change everything. He pulled out his phone, water-spotted screen glowing in the gray afternoon, and made a call, then another, and another. "What are you doing?" Rob asked. "Making this right," John said simply. What happened over the next 48 hours would become the stuff of local legend. John Wayne wasn't just a Marine. He was a connector, a man who'd spent decades building bridges between veterans, active duty personnel, and the communities they served. He was the unofficial patriarch of a network that stretched across 3 states, men and women who'd served, who understood the code, who knew that no soldier left behind meant something even after the uniform came off. The funeral was rescheduled. For 2 days later, John made calls. He pulled strings. He activated a network of Brotherhood that most civilians never see, but that exists in the shadows of every community. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Rob arrived at the cemetery expecting another lonely vigil. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. The cemetery access road was lined with motorcycles, dozens of them, ridden by members of the Patriot Guard riders. Beyond them, vehicles stretched down the road. Cars, trucks, an old school bus painted in camouflage, and the people. God, the people, they came in dress uniforms and faded service jackets. They came with flags and flowers. They came with children, perched on shoulders, and elderly parents supported on arms. More than 300 people surrounded Marcus Webb's grave as the ceremony began again. This time, there was a full honor guard. This time, there was a 21-gun salute that echoed across the cemetery like thunder. This time, when taps played, it was performed live by a bugler whose notes seemed to carry every ounce of sorrow and pride that the moment demanded. Rob stood at the front, barely holding himself together. John was beside him, steady as stone, and on Rob's other side stood men and women who'd never met Marcus Webb, but who understood that his sacrifice and his struggle were their own. When the flag was folded with crisp, precise movements and presented to Rob, the entire assembly saluted in unison. 300 hands raised as one. 300 hearts beating with shared purpose. After the ceremony, as people filed past to offer condolences, Rob found himself surrounded by resources he hadn't known existed. Veterans who ran counseling programs pressed cards into his hand. Others offered job connections, housing assistance, mentorship programs. A woman whose brother had died the same way Marcus had gave him the number for the support group. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "None of us are." But it was what John said as the crowd finally dispersed that Rob would remember for the rest of his life. They stood together by Marcus's grave, now covered in flowers and small American flags. "I know what you're thinking," John said, hands in his pockets, breath misting in the cold air. "You're thinking you should have done more for him when he was alive?" Rob nodded, not trusting his voice. "That burden's going to try to break you if you let it," John continued. "But I'm going to tell you the same thing my sergeant told me when I lost my best friend to the same demons Marcus fought. You can't carry guilt for what you didn't know, but you can carry forward his memory by helping the next person." John turned to face him fully. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come work with me. We run a veterans outreach program connecting returning soldiers with resources, jobs, community. We need people who understand the cost of service." "I don't have any experience with that kind of work," Rob protested weakly. "You showed up when no one else did." "That's all the experience I need to see." John's eyes were kind but unwavering. "What do you say?" Rob looked at the grave, at the flowers, at the evidence of what happens when one person decides that indifference isn't an option. He thought about Marcus, about the man who'd pulled him from burning wreckage in Kandahar, who'd talked him through panic attacks, who'd made him promise to live fully if he made it home. And he thought about the hundreds of veterans still fighting battles no one else could see. "When do I start?" Rob asked. John smiled. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock. And Rob," he paused, "thank you for being the kind of man who remembers." 6 months later, Rob had helped connect 47 struggling veterans with the resources they needed. He'd talked 3 off ledges. He'd learned that showing up was indeed the most powerful thing you could do. And he'd learned that heroism wasn't always about the big moments. Sometimes it was about standing in the rain at a cemetery for someone who'd never know you came. Sometimes it was about making a phone call. Sometimes it was about refusing to let someone be forgotten. John Wayne had taught him that. A man who'd seen one person standing alone and decided that solitude ended that day, because kindness doesn't vanish, it waits. And it finds its way back, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it arrives in a cemetery in the rain, carried by a stranger, who refuses to let you grieve alone. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. And if you believe in honoring those who serve, hit that subscribe button, because every week I bring you stories of everyday courage that deserve to be remembered.